In the late 1970s, Japanese citizens began disappearing without a trace. Young people, often in their 20s, would leave home to run errands or commute to work and never return. For years, these missing persons cases were unexplained, dismissed as accidents, suicides, or runaways. But the truth turned out to be far stranger and more disturbing than anyone imagined. The Japanese government, after years of pressure from families, eventually discovered that North Korea had been secretly abducting its citizens off the streets. These kidnappings weren't random. They were part of a calculated government program to train North Korean spies to blend into Japanese society, and one of the most heartbreaking cases was that of Yaiko Taguchi. Yaiko was a 22-year-old single mother of two living in Tokyo. In June 1978, she left her children at daycare and vanished. No one knew where she'd gone or why. For years, her family was left in the dark, tortured by not knowing what happened. It wasn't until decades later that her name came up in a completely unexpected place, inside a North Korean defector's testimony. A woman named Kim Hoi-hoo was a North Korean agent who helped carry out a terrorist attack in 1987, bombing a South Korean passenger jet and killing all 115 people on board. She was eventually caught, and during interrogation, she revealed that she had been trained in Japanese language and culture by a Japanese woman living in North Korea, and that woman was Yaiko Taguchi. According to Kim, Yaiko was forced to live under surveillance in a controlled compound, and her job was to teach agents how to speak, behave, and live like Japanese citizens. She never escaped and was used as a tool of espionage by a regime that had stolen her life. Her children, left behind in Japan, grew up never knowing where their mother had gone. It wasn't until 2002 that North Korea officially admitted to abducting 13 Japanese citizens, including Yaiko, but many believe the actual number is much higher. The regime claimed that Yaiko had died in a traffic accident in North Korea, but her family and the Japanese government never accepted that explanation. There was no body, no evidence, just a vague excuse wrapped in political secrecy. After the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, scientists were desperate to understand how radioactive elements like strontium-90 affected the human body, particularly bones. Strontium-90 mimics calcium and tends to settle in the bones and teeth, making children, infants, and even unborn babies especially vulnerable. So, the US Atomic Energy Commission began collecting bones and body parts to test radiation absorption, but not just any bones. They wanted young tissue, which meant babies, and here's where it gets horrifying. Many of these samples are taken without the knowledge or consent of the parents. In fact, many families were never even told that their children's bodies were being used. One particularly chilling revelation came from a British woman named Jean Pritchard. Her stillborn baby had been taken from her without permission in the 1950s. She was told she couldn't dress her daughter for the funeral, and only years later did she learn the child's body had been shipped to the US for nuclear testing. And this wasn't a one-off tragedy. Hundreds of samples were taken this way from around the world, including Australia, Europe, and North America. When Project Sunshine was eventually exposed to the public in the mid-1950s, there was international outrage. A one secret memo even revealed scientists complaining that they were having trouble acquiring enough samples of young tissue, lamenting the lack of dead babies to study, and while the government justified it all in the name of national security, the truth was impossible to ignore. The authorities had literally harvested dead infants' body parts for radiation experiments without consent. In the 1950s and 60s, at the height of the Cold War, paranoia was running wild, not just about Soviet spies, but about homosexuals. In both the United States and Canada, being gay wasn't just stigmatized, it was considered a threat to national security, and the reason behind this was that gay people could be blackmailed by foreign agents and therefore couldn't be trusted in government positions. This fear gave birth to one of the most bizarre and invasive devices in Canadian history, called the fruit machine. The machine was developed by Frank Robert Wake, a psychology professor working with the Canadian government. The purpose was to expose gay men and women working in civil service, the military, and the police. How it worked was both ridiculous and terrifying. Subjects were told they were taking part in a stress or personal test and were seated in front of a screen and shown a series of images, some neutral and others sexual in nature, including photos of men and women in various states of undress. While they watched, the machine recorded their reactions using several crude measurements, which included pupil dilation, heart rate, and sweat gland activity. They even measured how much the muscles contracted around the anus or squeezed. It was supposed to be scientific, a lie detector for your sexuality, but it wasn't science. It was a witch hunt. There was no scientific basis for any of it, and yet, based on the results of these absurd tests, people were labeled as security risks and quietly removed from their jobs. What's even more disturbing is how long this went on. The fruit machine was used during the 1950s and 60s, but the broader campaign to eliminate gay employees from government positions, which historians now call the lavender scare, lasted well into the 1980s. It took decades for the truth to come out, and even longer for the Canadian government to acknowledge the harm it had done. During Prohibition in the United States from 1920 to 1933, the government made it illegal to manufacture, sell, or transport alcohol, but they quickly learned something. Just because they banned it didn't mean people would stop drinking. In fact, people drank more. Illegal alcohol sales skyrocketed. Secret bars popped up in every city, and organized crime syndicates made millions smuggling booze, so the US government did something drastic. They started poisoning the alcohol supply. The goal was simple: make drinking so dangerous that people would be too scared to do it. You see, a lot of bootleg alcohol came from industrial sources, products like cleaning fluids, paints, and solvents that contained ethanol. Bootleggers would steal this industrial alcohol, then renature it, essentially redistilling it to make it drinkable. The government knew this, so they ordered manufacturers to start adding highly toxic chemicals to industrial alcohol to render it undrinkable. Chemicals like methyl alcohol, which cause blindness, organ failure, and death. Now, this wasn't just gross tasting stuff. It was lethal, and they didn't stop there. Over time, they increased the level of poison and even added additional deadly substances like benzene, kerosene, and formaldehyde. One chemist at the time described the government's formula as instant death. They made sure it would kill you if you drank enough. They knew people would keep drinking it anyway and would die, but that was the point. The government wanted the body count to scare the rest of the country into giving up booze. By the end of Prohibition, it's estimated that over 10,000 people died from poisoned alcohol, not from bad luck or shady backroom moonshine, but from a deliberate campaign by the federal government. Hospitals were flooded with victims suffering from seizures, hallucinations, and blindness. Newspapers at the time began reporting on what was happening, but most of the public either didn't believe it or didn't care, because the idea that your own government would knowingly poison its people sounded too insane to be real. Even today, most people have never heard of it.